Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking a deep breath and plunging into the complexities of modern Army sustainment doctrine.
That's right.
Our mission really is to move far beyond just simple logistics and explore that whole support ecosystem, everything needed for global operations.
Mm.
We're dissecting the core concepts, primarily looking at Field Manual 4.0 sustainment operations.
And it's a really critical discussion, I think, because the nature of warfare itself has fundamentally shifted.
Yeah.
You know, the whole idea of a safe, uncontested rear area,
Done.
it's basically obsolete now.
Yeah.
So if you're preparing for operations, especially in a peer environment, you absolutely have to internalize this core insight from Field Manual 4.0. It states, sustainment will be, and I quote, more complex, demanding, visible to the enemy, vulnerable, and therefore must be more synchronized, dispersed, and responsive than ever before.
And that's not just, academic talk. It's a statement about a completely new reality we're facing.
Yeah.
We see it playing out right now. The source material points specifically to the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian conflict as, well, the most recent stark example of the current character of war.
Yeah.
Enemies are using unmanned aerial systems, drones of every size and type, to actively find and engage sustainment formations. Roads, forward operating bases, they're all high-risk targets now.
And what's really fascinating, or perhaps concerning, is how this crystallizes the concept of the contested logistics environment.
Right.
This is really the central challenge driving all of modern sustainment doctrine. It's an environment where the adversary isn't just fighting your maneuver forces, they're directly targeting your logistics operations, your facilities, your activities, globally.
Globally.
Yes, using capabilities in every domain,
Right.
land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. So we're not just planning for efficient distribution anymore, we're planning for survival during distribution.
And then you layer on the sheer geography, the scale of potential conflicts. It makes that challenge, well, immense. It's what the doctrine calls the geography problem.
Oh, absolutely. The vast distances, the incredibly diverse environments you might face in theaters like the Pacific or Europe. I mean, you could be dealing with Arctic cold one week, jungle humidity the next, complex urban terrain, littoral areas.
Right.
All of that inherently challenges your operational reach, your endurance. The sustainment network has to somehow operate across these, frankly, sometimes impossible distances, often relying on host nation infrastructure that might be unstable or just limited.
Yeah.
It forces a fundamental shift in how we approach this doctrinally, just to make sure we can maintain that operational reach.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit more by looking at the doctrinal bedrock. Sustainment, officially defined, is the provision of logistics, financial management, personnel services, and health service support needed to maintain operations. Why is it so important that all four of these, quite different elements are formally integrated under the single sustainment warfighting function?
Well, that integration, that's really the heart of the doctrine. It underscores the fact that just moving stuff, logistics, is pretty useless if you don't have the people, the human capital from personnel services,
Right.
or the funding from financial management, or the medical readiness that comes from health service support. These four elements are completely interconnected. They're what enable freedom of action, extend your operational reach, and crucially prolong your endurance. In modern prolonged conflict, you simply can't have one without the others working in sync.
Let's break those four down then. Logistics is probably the one most people think of first.
Sure, logistics covers the flow of material, supply, maintenance, transportation, but it also includes things like engineering support related to bases, and very importantly, operational contract support. It's a physical engine, if you will. But then financial management provides the indispensable fuel for that engine. This isn't just about budgets, it's about budget execution, rigorous accounting, internal controls, and even predictive spending analysis. In large-scale combat, the ability to quickly fund host nation support, pay contractors on time, manage foreign currency, that can be a decisive factor in just maintaining operational momentum.
Then we get to the human element with personnel services. I think people sometimes overlook just how broad this function is.
They often do. Personnel services are absolutely essential for unit cohesion and fighting ability. It's about managing the manning and funding of the force, yes, but also maintaining soldier and family readiness, promoting moral and ethical values. It includes human resources support, legal support, religious support, even band support.
Veteran support.
Yes, believe it or not, it's part of maintaining morale and unit identity. It's all designed to ensure the total readiness of the soldier, not just their equipment status. And think about a high-casualty environment. The ability to manage human resources effectively, Provide that moral support. It's critical to preventing units from culminating, from breaking down.
And finally, health service support. This kind of ties it all together by keeping the force healthy and in the fight.
Precisely. Health service support involves everything from direct patient care at the front lines to medical evacuation, which includes medical regulating, deciding where patients go, and also medical logistics. And if you look again at the challenges of this contested environment, medical logistics becomes a really acute point of vulnerability.
How so?
Well, managing critical supplies like blood products, specialized pharmaceuticals that need specific handling, getting those things forward safely and quickly under threat, that's a huge challenge that sustainment leaders absolutely must plan for and protect.
Now, guiding all these functions are the 7 principles of sustainment. And you mentioned earlier, these principles often create friction, right? There are trade-offs when you try to implement them in a contested environment. Let's run through them maybe and talk about those trade-offs.
Yeah, these principles are really the commander's essential guides for applying operational art to sustainment. They're not just a checklist.
Okay.
First up is integration. This means maximizing effects by working seamlessly with joint forces, multinational partners, even other government agencies and commercial partners.
The trade-off being?
The trade-off is often complexity, both political and technical. Integrating complex supply chain systems or procedures across different nations or military services. That adds layers of difficulty, even if the end result is potentially maximizing resources. You need common standards, interoperability. It takes work.
Makes sense.
Second is anticipation. This is fundamental. Leaders have to visualize future operations and prepare the necessary resources before they're needed. It's kind of like predictive logistics, but relying more on running estimates, professional judgment, intelligence to pre-position resources, especially vital when you know transportation windows might be short or contested.
Responsiveness. That one seems like it's directly challenged by an enemy trying to break your supply lines.
It's absolutely at the core of fighting in a dynamic, contested environment. Responsiveness means delivering the right capabilities and resources rapidly to meet a changing operational picture. So if a tactical commander suddenly shifts their main effort, the sustainment commander has to pivot immediately.
And that might mean?
That might mean they have to violate another principle like economy, maybe by moving resources speculatively, resources that might not get used, just to ensure they're available if needed. Speed trumps perfect efficiency sometimes.
Which leads us to economy. That's the 4th principle about efficiency, right? Providing resources in the most effective, least wasteful manner. How does the doctrine square that with the need for, say, redundancy to survive enemy attacks?
That's the central tension, isn't it? Economy is heavily linked to this idea of precision sustainment, delivering exactly what's needed, when and where it's needed, no more, no less. But in a contested environment, the need for survivability, our 5th principle, often mandates the opposite, like redundancy in supply routes, dispersion of stocks, maybe using more expensive but faster air transport instead of cheaper, slower ground or sea transport, just to guarantee the delivery gets through. Commanders are constantly forced to balance these two competing demands, efficiency versus survival.
Let's dig into survivability a bit more. Beyond just spreading things out, what does this look like tactically for, say, a logistics unit on the move?
Survivability means actively protecting your forces and resources. It involves both passive measures like aggressive camouflage, concealment, using terrain and active measures like employing dedicated security forces, establishing local defense, and critically moving constantly.
So no more static logistics parks.
Ideally, no, or at least not for long. In this kind of environment, a logistics convoy or a temporary support area can't operate like it might have 20 years ago. It has to operate much more like a tactical maneuver unit, constantly aware of threats, ready to defend itself, or ready to disperse immediately if it thinks it's been spotted by enemy surveillance, especially drones.
Okay. Number 6 is continuity.
Continuity. This means ensuring uninterrupted support across all phases of an operation and across all echelons, from the strategic base right down to the individual soldier. This demands building resilience into the network from the start.
How do you build resilience when you expect disruption?
You have to accept that parts of your distribution system will be degraded or destroyed. So resilience comes from having pre-established alternative routes, maybe alternate supply sources, relying more heavily on host nation infrastructure where possible, or having commercial partners ready to step in and bridge gaps. It's about having plans B, C, and D ready to go.
And the last one, number 7, is improvisation.
Improvisation. This principle basically acknowledges that no plan, no matter how detailed, survives first contact with a thinking, adapting peer enemy.
Right.
Sustainment leaders, especially at lower levels, must be empowered and trained to adapt their operational and tactical actions immediately when the plan goes awry. This requires decentralized decision-making, initiative, and the ability to use whatever means are available when higher-level support is suddenly disrupted or denied, maybe because communications are down.
Okay, let's shift from the principles to the actual organization. Sustainment operates across, what, 4 levels of warfare: national strategic, theater strategic, operational, and tactical. And the doctrine introduces this concept of the strategic support area. That really emphasizes the global scale of this whole challenge, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The strategic support area is vast. It stretches all the way from the strategic industrial and support base, primarily in the United States, right into the theater of operations itself. This is where the Department of Defense, but also other government agencies, and crucially, the private sector, all work together, or are supposed to work together, to generate the forces and project the power needed.
The big challenge there must be synchronization.
Huge challenge.
Yeah.
You're trying to synchronize these massive organizations, many of which don't operate on the same timelines, don't use the same systems, and aren't even necessarily in the same chain of command. Getting everyone pulling in the same direction at the right tempo is incredibly complex.
And bridging that gap, connecting the U.S. base to the theater, requires some key national strategic sustainment providers. Let's talk about the big ones. First, the Defense Logistics Agency.
Right, the Defense Logistics Agency, or DLA. They act as the Department of Defense's executive agent for managing a wide range of common commodities. Think subsistence food, water construction and barrier material, medical material, bulk fuels, repair parts. A huge portfolio.
And their challenge in this contested environment.
It's really twofold for DLA. First, managing the global procurement and distribution of all that stuff, which is complex enough. But second, ensuring that the material is packed, configured, and ready for rapid, potentially contested delivery into a theater. This might mean bypassing the traditional large, centralized distribution centers, which are now obvious targets, and moving directly to dispersed points of need.
Okay. Then you have the Orchestrator of Movement, the United States Transportation Command, U.S. Transcom.
Yes. The Commander of United States Transportation Command, U.S. Transcom, exercises coordinating authority over the entire joint deployment and distribution enterprise. They are the architects of force flow, managing strategic airlift, sea lift, and surface transportation.
And in a contested environment.
Their critical mission becomes navigating contested sea lanes and air corridors. Imagine trying to sail a large transport ship or fly a C-17 into an area where the enemy has sophisticated anti-accessory denial capabilities.
Yeah, that's tough.
It requires incredibly deep collaboration with joint partners, intelligence agencies, and allies to understand the threats and ensure those strategic lift assets, the ships and the aircraft, can actually arrive, offload their cargo, and get out safely without becoming, high-value static targets themselves.
And there's a third key organization that handles the crucial interface at the ports, right?
That's the Military Surface Deployment and Distribution Command, SDDC, often pronounced SDDC. They execute the vital single port management function, essentially acting as the Department of Defense's interface with commercial seaports and transportation industries.
From the national level all the way into theater.
Exactly. They perform strategic port site surveys well in advance, coordinate the massive movement of forces and equipment through ports of embarkation in the U.S., and then manage the crucial handoff to the combatant commander at the seaport of debarkation in the theater. Their transportation brigades are the ones actually operating the port facilities, loading and unloading ships. In a contested environment, they are right on the front line, defending against potential sabotage, cyber attacks, or disruption at these absolutely critical entry nodes.
So once all that material and those forces arrive in theater, that's when the Theater Sustainment Command, or TSC, takes charge as the senior Army headquarters for sustainment in that whole area of responsibility. They sound like the overall architect within the theater.
They really are. Think of the TSC as the general contractor for all Army support and often coordinating joint and multinational logistics across what could be a continent-sized area. They have 4 primary operational responsibilities laid out in the doctrine: theater opening, setting up the initial logistics infrastructure, theater distribution, managing the flow across the theater, sustainment, the ongoing provision of support, and eventually theater closing.
That's a huge remit.
It is. They have to synchronize all those national assets coming in with the joint and multinational efforts already happening, setting the conditions for successful maneuver operations and controlling that overall flow of resources across vast distances.
How does the doctrine then differentiate the Theater Sustainment Command from the Expeditionary Sustainment Command, the ESC? Is it just a size difference?
It's more about scope and focus, though ESCs are smaller and more tailored. The Theater Sustainment Command, the TSC, generally focuses on the long-range strategic level planning. They're setting the theater for future operations, managing that critical transition from the strategic support area into the operational level. They're looking months ahead.
Oh, okay.
The Expeditionary Sustainment Command, the ESC, however, is typically task-organized under the TSC, sometimes assigned directly to a corps, to focus specifically on synchronizing the sustaining operations needed to meet the day-to-day and projected requirements of the supported force, usually a corps or potentially a joint task force.
So more immediate focus.
Exactly. The ESC is concerned with the immediate fight, the next 72 to 96 hours, maybe the next week. The TSC is thinking about the next 6 months and the overall campaign plan. The ESC allows the TSC to maintain that broader theater-level strategic focus.
Let's shift now to that phase before major conflict, the phase we call competition. The goal here is deterrence, assuring allies. But sustainment forces are already very active, aren't they? Shaping the environment.
Oh, absolutely. This is crucial work, often called setting the theater. During competition, sustainment forces are heavily involved in things like infrastructure development projects in partner nations, security cooperation activities, training foreign logistics units, for example, and establishing those critical civilian and host nation partnerships that will be needed for future support.
So it's like building the foundation.
Precisely. This early investment in access, basing agreements, understanding local infrastructure, building relationships, that's the foundational defense against operating in a contested environment later. It ensures that when forces do deploy, hopefully, they aren't starting completely from scratch in terms of support.
But even the act of deployment itself is now considered contested. Field Manual fourthe breaks force projection down into 3 phases, and they're all potentially contested. The first one is fort to port. This is the domestic leg, moving from home stations to the port. The idea that home stations, reserve centers, National Guard armories could be targets, that radically changes how we think about the rear area, doesn't it?
It fundamentally changes everything. I mean, think about that. In the fort-to-port phase, planners now have to actively mitigate potential disruption within the United States. This requires close partnerships with local, state, and federal law enforcement, maybe planning alternate movement nodes, different railheads, different highways.
And the threats aren't just physical.
No, not at all. Adversaries could use cyber attacks to disrupt rail control systems. They could use influence operations to try and spark civil unrest near critical bridges or transit points, or even physical sabotage to delay movements. Planners have to consider security for literally every mile of the journey, just ensuring the integrity of the force before it even leaves U.S. borders.
Oh, okay. Then the forces move globally in the port-to-port phase. This is where those big strategic lift assets become vulnerable.
Exactly. This is where kinetic attacks, missiles, submarines, aircraft, and non-kinetic attacks, cyber, electronic warfare targeting ship navigation or port systems become highly likely. The adversary goal is simple: reduce the throughput of forces and supplies.
So what do sustainers do?
The sustainment community, particularly SDDC and Transcom, have to work intensely to establish robust operational contract support and security cooperation for port operations, not just at the destination port, but sometimes at the port of embarkation too. You're anticipating enemy submarine patrols near choke points, maybe long-range missile threats against ships at sea, or even something as simple yet crippling as a cyber attack causing a power loss at a major container terminal that halts the entire flow for days or weeks. This phase demands extreme vigilance and adherence to that principle of survivability.
And the final step in projection is onward movement and integration. This is getting the forces from the arrival port or airfield to their tactical assembly areas inside the theater. This seems like where host nation infrastructure becomes a really critical vulnerability.
It often is. During this phase, sustainers have to plan routes very carefully, accounting for critical infrastructure like bridges or tunnels that might be vulnerable to sabotage or might simply be unsuitable for heavy military equipment. Imagine trying to move a 70-ton Abrams tank across a rural bridge designed for farm trucks in a partner nation.
Right. It might not hold.
Exactly. So sustainers need to pre-plan routes, maybe reinforce bridges, establish secure fuel and refit points along the way, provide maintenance support, arrange for rest stops, and secure those routes aggressively. This phase is where the strategic flow from Transcom meets the messy tactical reality on the ground, often under the enemy's watchful eye. It's not direct fire.
The doctrine uses the Pacific Pathways program as a really concrete example of this kind of competition phase sustainment in action. It sounds like that was a pretty tough test for the system.
Oh, Pacific Pathways, which started back in 2014 under General Vincent Brooks, was deliberately designed as a forcing function. It was meant to stress the entire sustainment enterprise against what they call the tyranny of distance in the Indo-Pacific theater.
What was the core challenge?
So the challenge was to strategically move entire brigade combat teams using a mix of sea and airlift, have them conduct multiple complex reception, staging, onward movement, and integration RSOI sequences in different countries, and then provide continuous sustainment for them over, say, 3 distinct 90-day operational periods, often spread across thousands of miles of ocean.
What kind of specific friction points did that program really expose that maybe validated the principles we see in the current Field Manual 4.0?
Well, it absolutely hammered home the necessity of integration and improvisation. They ran into significant real-world issues with varying host nation customs rules and clearance procedures, especially for things like repair parts Class 9 supply. Getting parts through customs quickly proved a major headache sometimes. It also starkly revealed the massive operational dependence on those strategic partners working together. The United States Army Material Command for parts and equipment, the Defense Logistics Agency for fuel and subsistence, the Military Surface Deployment and Distribution Command for port operations, and the Theater Sustainment Command, orchestrating it all. They had to operate in lockstep.
Any other lessons?
Yes, the availability and, crucially, the dependability of local operational contract support proved highly variable from place to place. Getting specialized services, like specific types of aviation fuel or heavy equipment maintenance in some locations, was a real challenge. So Pacific Pathways, through these complex multinational exercises, really helped refine procedures, establish those vital theater gateways, and solidify the access agreements that are absolutely critical for any future contingency in that vast region. It was a painful but necessary learning process.
Okay, now let's shift gears completely into the high-intensity phase. Large-scale combat operations, or LSCO. Sustainment here is what enables endurance, that ability to persevere over time, and also convergence, which is the concerted use of capabilities from multiple domains hitting the enemy simultaneously.
Right, and the sheer scale of consumption fuel, ammo, parts, everything, and the expected levels of destruction in LSCO demand not only unprecedented logistical capacity, but also, critically, unparalleled protection for that logistical effort. This brings us right back to that core concept, the dispersion mandate.
That seems like the central paradox. How do you actually command and control a logistics network that's deliberately spread out, maybe hiding, without losing accountability, without breaking that principle of continuity we talked about?
That is the operational paradox of modern sustainment and high-intensity conflict. Field Manual 4.0 is incredibly emphatic on this point. Forces and resources that are concentrated and static are just easy targets for enemy surveillance and destruction. So, sustainment forces must operate dispersed to increase their survivability.
But the cost is?
The cost is significantly increased complexity in command and control. It raises the risk of friction, miscommunication, delays, especially if you're also operating in a degraded or denied communications environment, which you have to assume you will be. So sustainment leaders and units have to be trained and equipped to do this difficult dance. Quickly mass assets just long enough to deliver critical support and then rapidly disperse again before the enemy can effectively target them. It requires agility, discipline, and excellent communication, even if it's analog.
Let's break down the specific sustainment needs for different types of operations within LSCO, starting with sustainment of defensive operations. What's the primary focus there?
In the defense, the focus is overwhelmingly on prepositioning supplies and ensuring the survivability of both the supplies and the sustainment units themselves. Commanders have to employ sophisticated camouflage, concealment, deception techniques. Prepositioning key sustainment stocks, especially construction materials, barrier materials, Class 4, and ammunition, Class 5, as far forward as safely possible is crucial.
Why so far forward?
To reduce response times when units in contact need resupply urgently. You anticipate high demand for those specific classes of supply needed to prepare defensive positions, building obstacles, bunkers, fighting positions. Defense requires a massive upfront investment in material, placed where it to be accessed quickly under fire.
And what happens when a defensive operation maybe has to transition into a retrograde, a planned withdrawal under pressure? That must put incredible strain on the transportation system.
It absolutely does. Defensive operations, especially retrograde, demand that commanders establish very clear priorities for maintenance, for recovery of damaged equipment, and for evacuation. You need those heavy equipment transportation assets, the HETs, specialized trucks and trailers, to evacuate not just damaged, but also perfectly serviceable heavy equipment, like your main battle tanks and fighting vehicles, to get them away from the advancing enemy.
But those are the same trucks you need to bring ammo forward.
Exactly. That's the acute logistical resource conflict. The requirement to pull valuable equipment back competes directly with the urgent need to push ammunition and other critical supplies forward to the units still in contact. It forces incredibly difficult decisions about what gets moved when.
Okay, shifting gears now to sustainment of offensive operations. Here, the emphasis flips completely. It's all about speed, volume, momentum, and the consequences of sustainment failure are pretty immediate, right?
Immediate and potentially catastrophic for the operation. Failure to sustain the offense leads directly to tactical pauses, loss of momentum, or even culmination, to the point where the attacking force simply runs out of steam, usually fuel or ammunition, and cannot continue the attack. So the focus here is on rapid, continuous throughput of supplies.
What kind of techniques does that require?
It requires innovative techniques like refuel on the move systems, or ROM, using specific configurations, maybe like a long-site refuel where multiple vehicles can fuel simultaneously, or establishing quick pop-up resupply points close behind the advancing forces. Anything to minimize the time any combat or logistics asset has to remain static and become a potential target. The tempo is just relentless.
And the consumption rates must be huge.
Astronomical, potentially. Sustainers have to accurately forecast dramatically increased consumption rates, particularly for fuel, Class 3, and ammunition, Class 5, especially for units like attack aviation brigades that might be supporting deep operations. Furthermore, the high tempo and potential for casualties demand the immediate integration of personnel replacements. New soldiers can't wait back at a replacement depot. They need to be pushed as far forward as possible, based on carefully established distribution priorities set by the theater commander, just to maintain the combat power of the attacking units.
Finally, let's touch on medical and personnel services under fire during these large-scale operations. The source material is pretty blunt about expecting a high casualty environment.
Yes, it's a sobering but necessary planning reality for peer conflict. Medical formations are designed with modularity in mind, allowing commanders to augment and reinforce medical capabilities, especially at Role 1, unit level, and Role 2, Medical Company battalion level, where the initial life-saving interventions happen. Planning has to continuously refine casualty evacuation routes and procedures using dedicated air and ground medical evacuation platforms, but also planning for using non-standard vehicles, loads of opportunity when dedicated assets are overwhelmed.
And the personnel side, managing casualties.
Equally critical. The Human Resources Operations Center, or HROC, plays a vital role in synchronizing casualty reporting across the theater. Ensuring casualty information is collected accurately and reported up the chain through official channels as quickly and respectfully as possible is paramount, not just for accountability, but for maintaining morale and informing replacement needs.
And handling fatalities must place a unique and somber strain on the system.
It does, absolutely. Fatality management plans have to be established very early in the planning process. The evacuation of human remains needs to occur without unnecessary delay. This isn't just for the obvious reasons of respect and care, but also, critically, to preserve potential forensic evidence for the Armed Forces Medical Examiner system. This process requires dedicated transportation assets, secure handling procedures, and trained personnel for managing both the remains and the personal effects, further complicating a distribution network that's already stretched thin, trying to push fuel and ammo forward.
Looking ahead then, preparing for this incredibly challenging environment, training seems like the absolute key vessel for adapting. How does Field Manual 4.0 say units need to train differently, specifically for survivability?
The training imperatives in the doctrine really stress operating in what feels like a state of constant disruption, because that's what the battlefield will likely be. Units absolutely must train the way they will have to fight in large-scale combat operations.
Which
Which means frequent, unpredictable moves of command posts and logistics nodes. It means rigorous drills on cover, concealment, and camouflage, not just as an afterthought, but as a primary task. It means executing aggressive reconnaissance and security operations around sustainment areas because they are targets. If you only train in a comfortable, static, safe environment during peacetime, well, you're setting yourself up for failure, possibly catastrophic failure, in the real fight.
And a critical part of that realistic training has to be preparing for contested communications, right? Given the known vulnerabilities in space and cyberspace.
Paramount. Absolutely paramount. You have to assume, plan for, and train for the fact that adversaries will disrupt, degrade, or deny access to our sophisticated digital command and control systems, including things like enterprise resource planning systems used for logistics tracking.
So back to basics.
In many ways, yes. Sustainment units, leaders, and soldiers must achieve proficiency in analog processes. This means leaders need to be capable of maintaining accurate manual running estimates of supplies and requirements. It means keeping an analog common operational picture maps, acetate, grease pencils, tracking movements and statuses manually, and crucially, it means being able to make sound decisions and issue orders when all that digital connectivity is gone. Operating degraded isn't just a temporary nuisance in LSKO, it's a fundamental condition that you must train for or risk mission failure.
Okay, on the technology front, though, the doctrine does talk about a goal, precision sustainment. This sounds like it could be the ultimate answer to that tension between economy and survivability we discussed earlier.
That's certainly the goal. Precision sustainment is defined as the effective delivery of the right capabilities, the right supplies, at the exact point of employment, precisely when needed. It's about leveraging data and technology to apply that principle of economy much more efficiently and effectively than we perhaps could in the past. The aim is absolutely to reduce waste, reduce stockpiles sitting around as targets, and reduce the exposure of logistics assets.
And what specific technology enables that kind of precision?
It's primarily enabled by what the doctrine calls predictive logistics. This isn't one single system, but rather an integrated system of systems approach. It involves sensors on equipment reporting status, advanced communications networks transmitting that data, and powerful analytical applications including data support tools and visualization dashboards that can process vast amounts of information.
To give
leaders much faster, more accurate, near real-time situational awareness of both demand signals and supply statuses. This kind of predictive capability, this decision dominance in sustainment, allows them to anticipate needs better and, hopefully, only mass resources for the briefest necessary period to meet a specific requirement before dispersing again. It supports that agile, dispersed model.
Finally, let's wrap up by talking about the commander's art in all this. The sustainment leader, whether it's at the ESC or TSC or even a brigade support battalion, seems to be constantly juggling competing risks and developing a concept of operations in this incredibly complex environment.
That's exactly right. The commander must continuously employ the operations process plan, prepare, execute, and assess. They have to apply operational art, considering elements like extending operational reach, maintaining tempo, and constantly assessing and mitigating risk. And as we've discussed, the key tension they face, almost daily, is balancing the risk between dispersion, which you need for survivability, and concentration or efficiency, which you often need to achieve scale and meet demands quickly.
The doctrine actually provides a pretty stark example of this inherent risk calculation, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a really good one to illustrate the point. Field Manual 4.0 describes a scenario where a commander might decide to commit their entire fleet of tactical fuel vehicles to push fuel forward to reach a decisive point in an offensive operation, enabling tactical success right now.
But the risk is?
The risk is huge. In making that decision to mass all those fuelers, the commander must consciously accept the fact that they are simultaneously jeopardizing future operations. If that entire concentrated fleet of fuel assets is then detected and destroyed by enemy action while it's moving or refueling, the force might culminate later simply because it has no fuel left. Every single major logistical decision becomes a calculated gamble against the enemy's capabilities and intentions.
That perfectly captures it, I think. The high-stakes complexity of modern military support. It's clearly not just about moving boxes from point A to point B anymore.
Not even close.
It's about anticipating multi-domain threats, integrating global partners seamlessly, constantly adapting and maintaining the fight across these vast contested areas, all while assuming that parts of your system will fail and you'll need to improvise.
Agreed. The complexity of sustainment is now absolutely intrinsically tied to the complexity of the maneuver fight itself. Sustainers today need to be maneuver experts in their own right, understanding the scheme of maneuver intimately so they can anticipate and support it effectively, even under duress.
Well, thank you. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into Field Manual 4.0, sustainment operations, and the challenges of the modern battlefield.
My pleasure. It's a critical topic.
And for you, the listener, Since we've established that the modern battlefield is really defined by distance and contested logistics, maybe consider this as you move forward with your own planning or thinking. We know the goal of reducing operational energy demand, using less fuel basically, is critical for prolonging endurance and enhancing survivability. So, how will that intense pressure to reduce reliance on the supply chain fundamentally change not just how we operate, but maybe even material design and supply chain requirements over, say, the next 5 years? The innovation being driven by these sustainment challenges, well, that's a story that's really only just beginning to unfold.